Welcome to another episode of Got Time with Christopher John, your scholar and gentleman in a hoodie. Social justice is a reparative effort opposing all forms of injustice. A brilliant example of social justice is the freedom rides of the 1960s. Betty Daniels Roseman, a social justice icon, joined the ancestors last month. She was a courageous woman who was a freedom rider during the summer of 1961. Freedom Riders were groups of activists who traveled on buses from state to state in effort to test the Supreme Court decision that outlawed segregated interstate buses and bus terminals. Her first rides were from New Orleans to Mobile, Alabama. Throughout her time as a Freedom Rider, she had been slapped, spit on, and arrested, yet she never resorted to violence. I had the absolute pleasure of breaking bread with her and her family over the years. I listened to her stories about the collective activism and social justice efforts of the time. I also listened to her beautiful poems, and yes, she was a brilliant poet. Thank you, Miss Betty Daniels Roseman, for being a brilliant example of achievement and resolve in every human endeavor. Joining me is a genuine brother. He is the host of the Museum Jedi Show podcast, where he leads dynamic conversations at the intersection of museums and social justice. He currently serves as the Senior Vice President of the Historic Sites at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Beyond his career achievements, he is a husband, father, and an intellectual warrior in the battle to preserve our history. My brother, Mr. Omar Eaton-Martinez, thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast, sir.
I am very excited to be here with Got Time, Christopher John. I love you, brother. I love what you've been doing, and I'm excited to get into this conversation with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to know the origin story of Museum Jedi. I almost brought my lightsaber, when I saw Jedi, but yeah, could you share with us the origin story of the show?
I would love that. It was basically, it served two purposes for me when I first started it. So I had the audacity of starting a PhD program at the age of 41. And I got to the point where I finished coursework slowly over time. And I've been struggling to get to the point where I can start dissertating. And I sort of landed on the idea that I was going to start doing a dissertation around museums and justice, but with a leadership sort of spiel. And so, riffing off of the great work that that was done with the Inclusive Museum Leadership book with Cinnamon Catlin Legucco and Chris Taylor, I was like, well, maybe I need to put together a show that would give me further content for this future dissertation, which, by the way, has not been written yet. And so that's one reason. The second reason was I was really inspired by the Netflix series High on the Hog, which features this African-American sommelier who goes to Africa and different parts of the diaspora in the United States and starts making these cultural connections around foodways and agriculture. And I was like, how dope would it be to do a show around Black cultural institutions and historic sites the same way? So I figured, well, maybe let's start small with the podcast And maybe one day Netflix will see the wisdom and the vision and bring me on to do the show. So that's how it started.
Outstanding. It's interesting you mentioned that's Dr. Jessica that was a part of that scholarship. I remember 2 months before it aired, this was like really in the middle of the pandemic that was going on, and she was a part of a Black History Month program, a virtual Black History Month program that I put on. I believe that would have been in 2021, I believe. And I think High on the Hog came out, I think, maybe a few months later. And I remember and I tuned in, and not one time in my pre-production meeting, she mentioned about this Netflix show that was coming on featuring her. She was just so modest about it, but she is a great intellectual, and so it's great to know that was an inspiration for your podcast show that you have going on.
No, it was great. It's been great. It's fun. It keeps my mind moving. It allows me to utilize the great network that God has blessed me with over the years. So I started off the first season, doing 4 episodes, just again with that in mind. And then life got a hold of me, as you know it does, and ended up taking this position I have now with the National Trust. And it's like, okay, well, I really need to focus on that. It's kind of a big job. But last year in the fall, after kind of looking at some people do things on Instagram Live, I was like, well, maybe there's something there that I can kind of do. It's a little bit easier than what I was doing before. So I just decided to launch back in it. And we're like 11 episodes in, whereas the first time around when I started, I only did 4. I've already done 11 so far, and the conversations have just been outstanding.
Right. Well, you have an outstanding career. I know that as long as I have been in the field, public history field and whatnot, we bonded many, many years ago, because there's not a lot of men in the field. And so, you have invested quite a few years in this thing called Good Trouble, illuminating the brilliant history of our past. And so my question to you is, what has been the most valuable lesson for you that you've learned thus far on your journey?
I think the most valuable lesson is to always be able to articulate a vision. Leadership means nothing without vision. And I'm a firm believer in sort of the backward design of life, to kind of look out futuristically and see where you want to be or what impact you want to have in the next 15 to 20 years, and plan backwards. And that's how I mostly try to navigate this space. And of course, the other lesson I'd say that sort of in concert with that is to always stand in the gap. There's always a gap that needs to be plugged in the work that we do. And people always ask me, well, like, how did you become sort of a thought leader around this? And not shy away from the word expert, but I guess thought leader is just another way of saying that. And what I tell them is, like, it's not like I went to school for this. Like, I went to school for a bunch of other things, but I saw a gap. I thought it was important that I plugged that gap. And in that process, I learned, right? Because I had to learn in order to accomplish what I need to accomplish. When you're passionate about something and you love something, you learn, right? We learn our spouses. We learn our children, right? So we can be there for them. We learn this work too. And I always tell people, this is nothing but love work.
You said something that was very significant. This journey wasn't intentional, original for you, and I can relate to that. So can you tell me, what was that turning point for you to where, you said you were going to school pursuing other endeavors, but you made this change into, public history, into museums and cultural institutions. What was that turning point for you?
Yeah, that's great. I started my professional career as a school teacher. I started as a 6th grade self-contained bilingual teacher in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And let me tell you something. I didn't go to school to become a teacher. right? I was in grad school at Clark Atlanta University getting a master's in African American studies. During that process, my wife and I decided to get married. And then shortly after, she got an opportunity to go to New York and pursue her dream to be a fashion model. And so she went to New York. I was intending to stay in Atlanta to finish up on some things. But this long distance thing is now for everybody, and it wasn't for us. So I dropped what I was doing, and I took my behind to New York to be with my wife. And in that process, I was like, well, I got to work and I got to, make money and have benefits and those types of things. So I'm walking down Brooklyn and I'm in Court Street. And Court Street is a street where the Department of Education is for New York City. And there was literally a person out there handing out flyers saying, anybody with a college degree, if you're interested in teaching, come see us. And so I was like, well, I didn't come here to be a school teacher, but I did in my mind at the time wanted to be a professor. That's where I thought I was going to go. So I was like, okay, next best thing. So I went over there with my transcripts. They saw that I could speak English and Spanish. So they were like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and send you to IS-111 Enrico Fermi, Bushwick, Brooklyn. So I go to IS-111, and as soon as I cross the threshold of that building, people in my face talking about, we've been trying to shut down this school for 26 years. Welcome. And so that's what I walked into. So it was an interesting time. So I did that, ended up finishing my teaching career in New York City in the South Bronx in alternative high school, which was a much better experience, by the way, because I had leadership that really saw something in me, saw a leader, maybe the head of my department. I was teaching world history, economics. I was able to teach electives at the high school level, which was amazing. So I created an African American history course. And then here's the kicker. I was able to create a hip hop as a cultural art form course to these kids in the South Bronx. And I'm a kid from Silver Spring, Maryland, teaching these kids about the history of hip hop, which was amazing. So I did that and did that for a few years, came back to DC area once my first child was born, and I had the opportunity to work at NASA. Goddard Space Flight Center as an education and outreach specialist. And that's where it began, because in that work as an education and outreach specialist, I was tasked to create relationships with informal education organizations like museums. And so then I started building these workshops where we would bring in informal educators to learn about the sun and the earth and its relationship and all the missions that inform that relationship. And then I started meeting people in museums, and I saw what they were doing as educators. I was like, hey, man, I would love to do that, right? So my contract ends with NASA, and I started trying to get into the Smithsonian. That didn't work right away. And so I went back to teaching to DC public schools, where I taught English language learners social studies for a couple of years. And then I ended up coming to the National Park Service as a park ranger doing public history in the historic house museum called the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House. Over there in Vermont Avenue, Washington, D.C. So that was really my first museum job.
Wow. That is a journey. It's, and I think it's very good for listeners, and especially if there's any young people, to understand that journey, because sometimes for many of us, our purpose is not revealed to us right away. But the one thing that you've done, even with that journey, is that you are making a contribution along the way. You were helping to shape young minds in the classroom. And you do that through the work that you're doing as well, as you continuing to shape young minds. And so that's outstanding. So I want to talk a little bit about, museums. And I've had the opportunity in this past year or so to visit the Jimmy Carter Library and Museum in Atlanta. And it is the third presidential museum that I visited. And I walked away thoroughly captivated by the exhibits and the content. And this year, we have the Obama Presidential Center opening up.
That's right.
And so I'm curious to get, your thoughts on this being added to the canon, so to speak, of our cultural institutions. So what are your thoughts about the Obama Presidential Center that's going to be opening up this year?
So just to give you a little context, so the Jimmy Carter Museum and Library, I met the woman who run that through our Presidential Site Summit. So at the National Trust, we have 3 sites that are connected to presidential history. And one of our co-stewardship partners is the White House Historical Association, which also puts on a Presidential Site Summit every September. And when I went to the last one in 24, this woman whose name is escaping me, but it's an African-American woman. And she was on one of the panels, and she was just talking about all the great programming and talking about President Carter's legacy. And at that point, he was still alive. And it was just amazing to see this woman of color, lift up those great stories about the president. So I'm glad you had a great time. As far as the Obama Center is concerned, I think the one thing I'll just provide some context to is that Obama Center is not going to be part of the presidential library system in the same way that what you're experiencing. So that there is an Obama library in the works that will be part of that system that's run by a friend, Dr. Kevin Phillips. And I believe, from what I understand, and I don't know where it resides now, because as you know, many things have changed in the last year, that presidential library was not going to be a physical library, but a digital library. Again, I don't know where it stands now. I haven't talked to her in a little while. I just wanted to make that point of clarification. But the Obama Center in Chicago seems like it's going to be an outstanding place to be. I've talked to a couple of people who work there, and the planning for it seems like it's amazing. I know they have to work a lot with the community because they're in a very community-centric space. And I look forward to it because I think they put a lot of time and money into it. And I love the fact that it's connected to the foundation and the larger work that they do.
Absolutely. Now, this might be a little bit closer to both of you and I heart. And it's sitting along the Harlem River in Bronx. The Hip Hop Museum is opening this year as well.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, can you share a little bit about your? I'm quite sure you're excited because you talked about you taught hip hop, and so there's a hip hop museum. I mean, hip hop is 50 plus years young. What are your thoughts about that? A museum being added.
Well, it's a long time coming. This project has been going on for quite some time. I passed by the site, I think it was last year. It's a multi-use site. So I think the first 2 levels is the museum. Mm-hmm. And then there's a residential space up there. I'm not sure if they're going to be condos or they're going to be rentals. And I think there's going to be other businesses in that space. And so I love that. I love the fact that a museum like that is going to be embedded with other businesses and a residential space in an area that they're clearly trying to pour into, right? And this is still the South Bronx. Now, that area is sort of, I'm sure some people would argue it's being gentrified for sure, but it's the South Bronx, right? There's a lot of history for people of color in that space. And it's not far from 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, where it all began with Kool Herc and the Black Party, right? So when I went right before COVID, there was a conference at the Schomburg that I went to that was held by the Hip Hop Education Center, which is another entity run by a woman named Martha Diaz. She's like a sister to me. And that one is sponsored by NYU and Columbia University. So they did a symposium at the Schomburg. And in that evening, there was a satellite exhibition that the people at the Hip Hop Museum have put together at a space right across the street from where the site ultimately is now. And I walked into that space, Chris, and you know who were on the 1 and 2s? Grand Wizard Theodore. Like it was, I was like, first of all, he looks like he's younger than me, and I know that he's not. And he was just on the 1 and 2s doing his thing.
But hold on, nobody can look younger than Dougie Fresh, though. That brother looks like he's still 14, 15 years old.
I can't even argue against that. But it was just amazing seeing him, and there were other, hip hop luminaries and dignitaries in the space. And it was just wonderful seeing like what this place could look like. So now that they have the building and they have the two, I think it's at least 2 levels of galleries and community centers, I think it's going to be an amazing space. Rocky Bucano, who was the executive director, founding director, has really been doing a lot of great work engaging folks like LL Cool J and Fat Joe, and of course the Bronx borough president, and all those people have been there and really offering a lot of support. And what my hope for the space is that it becomes not just a space for the community, not just a space for the country, but a space for the globe, because we know now that hip hop is a global entity, and my hope is that it's fully representative of that.
Absolutely. I want to, your podcast and a lot of what I do on my podcast as well is rooted in social justice. And so I'm curious, when you think about the social justice identity of hip hop, I'm curious to know what comes to mind. And I'll be the first to share what comes to mind for me. I remember I'm a 70s baby, and this group captivated my imagination, and that's X-Clan. Oh, man, you couldn't tell me nothing about X-Clan. It's the red, the black, and the green with the key. I mean, to me, they were the epitome of this Afrocentric revolutionary. And when I think about social justice identity of hip hop, I think about X-Clan.
I love it.
Where does your mind go when you think about the social justice identity of hip hop?
I know it's exploding right now with different thoughts, including just a quick shout out to not just the Hip Hop Museum, but the Hip Hop Hall of Fame that's being run by J.T. Thompson, which is going to be a museum and a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, which is already under construction as well. And he's doing a lot of great work. But it's funny, somebody asked me the question in the Black History Month program this past Sunday that I was in, like, what was your introduction like to Black history? And it was hip hop. It was hip hop, right? Like I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, to parents who came from Puerto Rico, right? We're Black Puerto Ricans. There's no mistake about it. We're not ambiguous. You're not gonna not think we're Black, right? All of us are we present that way. But in Puerto Rico, Black history in the school system, I mean, you can imagine Black history in the States is not that great. Black history in Puerto Rico is even less in terms of the school systems. But obviously there's a lot of Black people in Puerto Rico. And I bring that up to say that, like, it's not something I grew up with in that way. Whereas, I have African-American friends who I grew up with who they had the Black church, and they had, some of them had Jack and Jill, and some of them had these other influences in their life. And so it's not like there was a denial of Blackness in my house, like in a firm rebuke. It just wasn't something that was brought forth in an explicit way. And so when I became a fan and a participant in hip hop, that's what changed my life in terms of Black history. When I'm hearing Chuck D talk about Farrakhan as a prophet that I think you ought to listen to, I listened, right? Like I went out and I found out who he was, and I understood, what his connection was to the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, all these people. And of course, we always had MLK out there, but to dig into the nuances of his political activism also was really a result of me being an active participant in hip hop. And so for me, that's my entree, and that's how I see hip hop being a justice-centered space. You think about, the Native Tongues movement with De La and Tribe and Latifah and Black Sheep and all these people like Jungle Brothers, right? Jungle Brothers, what does that mean, right? These people embracing the fact that the jungle is associated with Africanity, and they embraced that, but they also understood that there was a double meaning of concrete jungle being folks who are from New York City. So for me, it's always been it's ultimately developed into what I call a hip hop epistemology. It frames the way that I think. We talk about cipher. Cipher is an opportunity for people to come together and build off each other's knowledge, right? We're rhyming, but we're riffing off each other's rhyme. We do that in museology. We do that in African American studies. We do that in history, right? We build off of a thing. We cite each other, even if we don't cite it explicitly. There's always some type of citation in hip hop, even by the way that we sample other genres of music. And so for me, it's an epistemology of building community and knowledge and ultimately joy.
Man, I never looked at it that way, as it's a cipher, because I think about all the times when we go to conferences and we get together and we are learning from each other, we're being challenged by each other, we're being inspired by each other. But that is actually what happens at a cipher when you have MCs that are gathering together. It's that iron sharpening iron. It is the encouragement. It's the challenge. It's all that. And so I see that. I never made that connection until you crystallized it right there. That's outstanding, man. So so I want to talk about, a little bit about our cultural institutions. And a lot of us are going through a challenging time right about now. And so I'm curious to get your take on restorative measures that we can take for our sites and our institutions so that they can be bolder in truth-telling, resistance, and being transformative. So, what are some things that are you seeing that, we need to be thinking about in restoring our sites and institutions?
Well, one of the things that I've always talked about, pre-January 2025 is the idea of our institutions being a value add to the community. And, it's a struggle no matter which way you cut it, but I feel deeply that if you are a value add to your community, if you are embedded in the community and the people see you as a positive contributor, I don't think there's a lot of concern, right? I think it's people that haven't been doing that, that are kind of halfway been doing that, and are still struggling to find their way. And now in this new moment, are like, what am I supposed to do now? And I think if the community loves you, they're going to fight for you, right? Imagine someone trying to bring a bulldozer in front of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. There would be 5 million Africans laying their bodies in front of that space because that institution has gone out of its way to become a value add to the Black community, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if all of us can say that, right? And I think we really have to think deeply about what that means. I mean, thinking about what it means to be a place where people do voter registration, thinking about a place where people can experience food justice where there are food deserts, right? This is what people care about. Like, I'll use a biblical analogy. I mean, Jesus had to feed those 5,000 before they sat down and listened to the spiritual truth, right? You gotta edify the body. Right?
There you go.
And if we're not edifying the body, man, it doesn't really matter, what education you have in there, because they could care less. Nobody cares about what you know until they know that you care, right?
Mm-hmm. And that is the social justice identity of museum and cultural institutions. It's not just to exhibit the artwork that's on the wall, but it's also it's the community engagement. And that was a great, you talk about, you went to the biblical, story with, Jesus and, the loaves, the 5 loaves and the fish and whatnot. And it's almost, how can you educate people? How can you bring them in to incite critical thought if they're dealing with poverty, if they're dealing with starvation, if they're dealing with these social realities? And so, our institutions need to be grounded in playing a role in improving those circumstances. And I think, as you said, you got to have that commitment to the community, giving to the community, because then the community is going to protect you as well when they come for you.
I think one of the things that I think about is we're always trying to find a way to build value in what we have. And, sometimes we get frustrated and why aren't people coming to our sites or to our museums? And what I'm saying to folks is, how come we're not finding out what the community needs? Can we find out what the community needs? Like, if we find out what they need, and I'm using the word need on purpose, then we become more of a value add. Then access is created through community and through mutual intellectual, process. Like, we're going to think about this together. I think we try to figure out too much in isolation. Let's figure it out with the people that we want to serve. They'll tell us, and we'll tell them what we can do. Because they might tell us, hey, we need for you to be, everything to be free. And every time you come in there, I need like a meal. Well, we might not be able to do all that right away, but here's what we can do. And as the need continues and as we go out and become more of a value add, then there might be funders and philanthropists who are ready to kind of help us with that. But they're not going to do that until they think that the community believes in us. So it just, we got to, sometimes we think about it one way. We're always like, well, how come Black people don't come to this space? Well, have you been to Black people yet? You got to go where they at too. It's a two-way street. Like, you want them to come here, but you ain't trying to go. That's not right. You got to be, this has to be mutually beneficial. This paternalistic idea of partnering is always going to get people in trouble.
I think too, probably a threat to that and that engagement with the community is the corporatization of a lot of our institutions. When you have corporations that come in and they give dollars, but every dollar has a string attached to that. And so therefore it kind of, guides that institution away from that community activism. And I think, to me, you can provide your perspective on that, but I think that is a real threat when we look at our institutions.
Yeah, I think it's a threat. And I think in my current position, one of the things we've been working on a lot, and great support from our CEO, Carol Quillen, is to think about our sites as businesses, right? And I can tell you, I'll be honest with you, when I people have told me that before in different parts of my career, and it's always irked me, right? We're nonprofits. We're not supposed to be thinking about businesses, but we do have to think about how we can create revenue in a mission-driven, ethical way. And I think that it's possible. If once you understand what your distinct qualities are, and again, connecting those to things that the community values, then you can responsibly commodify it, right? I'm not necessarily thinking that you go from being free to start charging $200 a head, but you gotta be able to find out what your market is, what they can afford, and what they create value in. And I think it can't always be, Mackenzie Scott, and please, Mackenzie Scott, keep giving us money, but it can't just be Mackenzie Scott giving us, 8-figure gifts, right? It has to be that and us having a financial sustainability plan that makes sense, that supports our mission.
Absolutely. I had a thought that came to my mind. You're part of a fraternity, right? I lose track of what's the name of the fraternity that you're.
Well, we start describing it by the greatest fraternity on earth, and then the name is Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But it's not the oldest and coldest, but I love you brothers. I love you brothers dearly. This is the idea that I had. I've been involved with my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I had an idea. What would it look like, or how you think this would possibly evolve if all our Black Greek organizations adopted a museum or historical site?
I love the idea, and I know you've seen it from your fraternity, and I've seen it from other organizations as well. They've done sort of these things on sort of various levels, right? But I think we should all be doing that. I think that the low-hanging fruit is to look at the museums and historic sites that support our notable members, right? You've seen what Alpha did, a tremendous work with the MLK Memorial. I've seen Delta's support the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House. I've seen Omega support Carter G. Woodson. I've seen some Sigma support the George Washington Carver and things that are happening around John Lewis's legacy. So you have some of that happening, but I would like to see a more of a concerted effort and something that's really supportive of the entire national Pan-Hellenic. I think there's some synergy there that we can create amongst ourselves that would be supportive of everyone. I was just on the phone with our new international historian for Phi Beta Sigma, Dr. Kevin Christian, and we're looking at different things in terms of how can we do better about taking care of the archives of our fraternity. How can we do better about memorializing the history of the fraternity itself and its individual members, especially some of the notables? And I was participating. I participated in a couple of sessions fairly recently, I guess a couple of years ago for a Sala. Some Sigmas got together and we did a plenary on Asa Philip Randolph because it was the one in Jacksonville and he has connections to Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about that. And then a little bit more recently, we did something at Moreland Spingard at Howard where we talked about the fraternity's history. And my contribution was more on how notables are memorialized. So looking at the bust of Asa Philip Randolph in Union Station and the other statue they have of him in Back Bay in Boston, and then looking at like the statues they have of Kwame Nkrumah in Accra in Ghana. It has a big, beautiful mausoleum where he and his wife lay, and they have a huge statue of him there, and just the different memorials like that. Huey P. Newton out in Oakland, California, beautiful bust is actually still maintained and supported by the Black Panther Party Museum. Right. So like all these different things.
Definitely. You had a brother on your podcast a few episodes back that's out there in Oakland. What is that brother's name again? He does this History in 3, I believe, all the time. Yeah.
That's a good Dr. Xavier Buck.
Man, that brother is outstanding. I saw him on your podcast, and he is really he's locked in. He's locked in and does a lot of great work. And so you've done some great things. So I know you've been gracious with your time, because this is February, and I know that, you are very busy speaking, organizing, planning, and doing all the wonderful things that you're doing. And so I will give space if there's anything that you want to share, but I do have a closing question for you as well in combination with that. And the question is this is a modern take on Black history. So my podcast is steeped in really that Black history and making it personal. So my question is, if you could speak to an ancestor, who would it be and why?
It would be Jesus, because of what he means to me and my faith, and my family, and for anybody who's a Christian, that gave the ultimate sacrifice. And to have someone who lived on this earth and to walk the way he did, sinless, I got some questions for you, brother. Like, I know why you did it, right? I know why you did it. It was out of love for us, but like the how, like how did you do that, right? Like how did you maintain such discipline for the time you were here on earth? But that's definitely someone I would talk to.
Brother, I'm a firm believer that you're a praying brother. You're a genuine brother. And I'm quite sure some of them answers are coming to you. They're coming to you, but it's only revealed on when it's on his time, So absolutely. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners and viewers, before we get out of here?
Sure. I think, the Museum Jedi show has been, blessed to have great folks, and I'm looking forward to when we have you on there. Our next episode is going to have the great brother Mod Ward from historic Mitchellville Freedom Park.
You have to do me a favor. You have to get him to talk about sports. I'm
writing that down.
Yes, his takes on social media when it comes to sports, and it comes out of left field for us museum professionals. Although I say history intersects with everything, even sports. But yeah, you have to ask his take on sports are absolutely hilarious.
No, he's fantastic. I mean, this month in February, we had Shakia Gillette Warren from Black History Museum and Cultural Center in Richmond. We're gonna have Ahmad this Monday from Hilton Head, historic Mitchellville Freedom Park. Then on the 23rd, the 16th, we're gonna try something different and do something on location in New York at the Lower East Side Cultural Center, which is a center in the Lower East Side in a historically Puerto Rican neighborhood. And I'm going to be interviewing Wanda Benvenuti, a photojournalist who has a project called The American Boricua. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then lastly, on the 23rd, we're going to have Juan Pablo Vizcaíno and Gloria and Sasha Antonetti, two freedom fighters in Puerto Rico, who are doing a lot around Black culture, including the restoration of a place called El Ancón de Loíza, which used to be a place where Black people in particular, would go from Loíza to San Juan before there was a bridge. Mm-hmm. And then when the bridge was created, obviously the barge became obsolete, but it was always a Black family that ran that barge. And through the descendants of those folks have restored that barge, created a beautiful Black art cultural center that we'll talk about, including the home that they lived in, which they now created into a historic house museum. But on top of that, they also have a project that's now being shown at the Smithsonian called Hebras y Vejigantes, which is a combination of a video display around Black culture in Puerto Rico that is part of the Outwind Beethoven Portrait Gallery competition. So it's on display until August. So we're going to talk about those two projects. So, yeah, man, that's what we're doing in the next few weeks.
Well, I definitely want to encourage my listeners that may find themselves in those areas. Please tap into those outstanding institutions and programs that are happening throughout the country, especially there on the East Coast or where you're at. Brother Omar, thank you so much for blessing us with your time. Brother, continue to doing the work, the good trouble that you're doing. You are a brilliant example for many of us. And I just want to let you know I appreciate you dearly.
I appreciate your time, man. I remember when we first met back in 2016 in DC, and it's been good to see what you've been up to. And I hope to continue to see more good work from you.
Absolutely. You take care, my brother.
All right, now.
For my people who may find themselves on the West Coast between now and the beginning of March, there's a fascinating exhibit at the Oakland Museum of California called Black Spaces, Reclaim and Remain. The exhibit explores the histories of displacement, resistance, and resilience within Black American communities and traces how these communities have resisted dispossession and reimagined spaces of home and belonging. A sincere thank you to Xavier Pierre with Mama's Creole Kitchen for being the first old gold friend of the podcast. Specializing in Cajun and Caribbean food, Brother Pierre's catering and mobile food service is right on time. For information on how you can be a friend of the podcast and support our meaningful content, look for the info in the bio. I'm your scholar and gentleman in a hoodie. Know thy history.